So today, what we're looking at is what are the risks when you go out sailing and what can we do to reduce those risks and make your sailing experience much safer. I've recruited the help of the global Joyrider TV community to give us their experience and what they do to make their sailing experience safer. So let's jump in and take a look. Hello, yes, it's Joe here for Joyrider TV. Now, none of this is meant to be for the purpose of making you worried or putting you off going sailing at all. What we're trying to do here is just identifying what the risks are when you go out sailing and what steps can be taken to reduce those risks so that your sailing experience is much safer. So what we're trying to achieve every time we go out sailing, as well as you having a lovely time, is to be able to return back to where it is that you set off from with the same amount of people on the boat, all having had a very nice time, and with the boat in the same condition as it was when you left. So what are the biggest risks that we might encounter when we go out sailing? You might, of course, capsize while you're out sailing. The first danger when it comes to capsizing is if you were to get separated from your boat. When the boat is on its side, it can drift quite quickly, especially if there's a strong wind. So keeping a hand or staying attached somehow to the boat by holding on to a boat part is absolutely essential to stay with the boat. Along with this, there is a danger when you capsize of getting caught or trapped underneath the trampoline. Now, this can sound extremely alarming, so we just need to keep it in mind. If you've capsized and you end up between the trampoline and where the mainsail is, you want to get out of that space as soon as you can once you're in the water. So if you're behind the shroud, you should just go towards the back of the boat. If you're forwards of the shroud, you can go towards the front of the boat. Should the boat then turn all the way upside down, you're not going to be stuck under the trampoline. Another good way of avoiding that happening is by fitting a masthead float to your boat. That means that your boat can't actually go all the way upside down. So that will also greatly reduce that risk. When you capsize, especially if it's windy, things can happen pretty fast and you could find yourself hitting a part of the boat. Hitting a part of the boat could of course be quite painful and it could even cause injury. So what I personally do is every time I go sailing, if I feel that there is a chance of a capsize, I'll definitely wear my helmet, and I always sail wearing a buoyancy aid, even if there's very light wind, because as well as helping you to float, this buoyancy aid is also going to provide you with quite a lot of padding. And then if it's anything other than very warm conditions, wearing a wetsuit is a very good idea, as the wetsuit is also going to provide you with extra padding. And then finally with the capsize is, do you know the technique for bringing the boat back upright in the event of a capsize? If you don't, I would say checking out some videos on righting the capsize before you go sailing is absolutely essential. Things can happen and you can even capsize in light winds, so make sure you do know what the technique is. If you have the opportunity to practice, for example in shallow water, you could turn the boat onto its side and then practice bringing the boat back upright. This is also going to be very helpful for when it happens for real. You're going to have a much better idea of what to do. Something else that could happen while you're out sailing is a man overboard. If you are the skipper of the boat, or perhaps if you're the crew on the boat and you're not so experienced, then one of the best things to do is just to turn the boat into the wind to stop the boat as soon as you possibly can, and that will make it much easier for your man overboard to swim back to the boat. Once you've turned the boat into the wind, you want to keep the rudders pushed across, and that will keep the boat stopped. I have made a video on stopping the boat. If you are sailing with a novice crew for the first time, it's a very good idea to make sure that they are briefed in what to do in the event of a man overboard, so that then if it does happen, it's not going to be a complete disaster with them sailing off away from you, leaving you out there on your own. Of course, if you are sailing with an experienced crew, like I was on this occasion with David, your crew can then grab the helm of the boat and then sail back to you and pick you up. Very nice too. But what if you're sailing solo and you fall off the boat? Firstly, I would say all the time you should be holding on to your main sheet. By holding on to your main sheet, it means if you do fall off the boat, your main sheet is going to keep you attached to the boat. And if it is windy, it's actually going to sheet the mainsail in as you hold it, and that might even capsize the boat, or if not, it's certainly going to turn the boat up into the wind, making it much easier to get back to your boat. There is the topic of should you wear a safety line like you might do if you were sailing a yacht. What I would say is if you're going for an extended passage and you're going to be on one tack for a long time, then yes, some sort of safety line would be a very good idea. But if you're sailing in a small area, you're going to be doing a lot of manoeuvres, changing your position on your boat, then I would say no, but just make sure you're always holding on to the main sheet. Problems with the boat. The first, and the one that happens most frequently, is the mast could come down. Now, to prevent the mast coming down, you do want to periodically be replacing your standing rigging of the boat. That is the shrouds and the forestay, the parts that hold the mast up. If you keep your boat next to the sea, where there'll be a lot of salt in the air, your rigging does degrade much quicker in these conditions. So I would say you certainly want to be replacing your rigging every 4 years. If you're keeping your boat next to a lake or perhaps at your house, then perhaps every 5 years will be fine for replacing your rigging. Along with the mast falling down, you could experience a snapped halyard where one of the sails falls down. Of course, if it's a rope halyard, you can keep an eye on all of the ropes of the boat, replacing them as they start looking worn or frayed. Along with the rigging of the boat, if you are sailing a Hobie 16 or 14, 15 Pacific or something that uses a wire halyard, you should replace the halyard at the same time as when you replace the rigging. Once the mainsail is down, unfortunately, it's not possible to sail a catamaran upwind. You might experience steering problems with the boat. This could lead to some pretty unsafe situations, especially if there is other water users about and you've lost the ability to steer your boat. To avoid this from happening, I would say definitely once a season at least, check your rudder system and give it a service. I have made some videos on this topic, so well worth a look there. And finally, a problem which could be extremely significant with your boat could be the boat sinking. One of the most likely reasons for the boat sinking is if you fail to put the bungs in. The first thing and the last thing that you should do when you go to prepare the boat is put in the bungs. The boat shouldn't sink completely because inside the hulls there should be some foam buoyancy. It will make it extremely difficult to handle, very difficult to sail. So make sure you put your bungs in. If you've had soft spots on your boat, this delamination can actually lead to big cracks appearing in the boat which could let the water in, or in some situations the deck might actually come away from the sides of the hull. If that happens, then the hull can actually snap in half. So do check your hulls for soft spots, and if you have got soft spots, take your hull to a boat builder for repair. One of the next significant hazards when you go out sailing can be other water users. Now, other water users can also be very useful. If you do have some sort of situation while you're out sailing, another water user can either help by sounding the alarm that you're having trouble or actually towing you back in. But we do need to be aware of other water users. So firstly, I would say if you are sailing in a busy piece of water, then I would certainly, before launching, have a good look at what's going on the water, identifying potential hazards, especially if there's other craft coming quite close in to the beach, or if there are swimmers, definitely. If there are people swimming, you don't want to be setting out through a load of swimmers. This won't necessarily be so hazardous to you, but it can be quite alarming for them to find themselves between the hulls of a catamaran. Great fun for you, I know. So there might be other sailing boats out, there might be windsurfers, kite surfers, wing foilers, people in power boats, on jet skis. There could be a number of other things out. Whenever you're sailing, two things that are really going to help you. The first one is spatial awareness. Always try to keep your eyes out of the boat, having a look at everything else that is going on the water, looking for what could be potential collisions. And then along with the spatial awareness, thinking ahead. So if you do think that could be a potential collision, then think, right, what action can I take early to avoid this potential collision happening? You should be avoiding shipping lanes if at all possible. These big ships, they do go a lot faster than you think. As well as that, they do kick up a lot of wake, big waves off the back of those boats. So if you're looking at a big ship which is in motion and you're thinking, do you think we can get around the front of that? The answer is no, you can't. Definitely go round the back of it. If you're sailing in an area where there are anchored boats, if there are larger anchored boats, they will cause some sort of disturbance to the wind that could make things happen a little bit strangely if you sail close to them. So give them a lot of space. If there's tide or current, then definitely really think about if you're going to go around the front of an anchored boat or behind it, because it's very easy for the tide or current to push you down onto an anchored boat. So really pay attention to that. And again, thinking ahead is really going to help you there. But what we find is the bigger and the more expensive an anchored boat is, the more of a gravitational pull it has, and it will actually try to suck you in with the wind doing all sorts of strange things around it. An anchored or moored boat might also have people fishing on board. So if you do see an anchored boat and it looks like there might be people fishing, do have a good look for any fishing lines and then take the appropriate course to avoid any fishing line. And then the other water users to be aware of are sea creatures. Here in Vasiliki, all that we're likely to encounter is perhaps a mildly irritated dolphin. But if you're sailing in shark-infested waters, I don't have the experience of sailing in those areas, but if you do, then I think we could all learn from your experience. So put it in the comments below. What do you do to avoid being eaten by a shark when you're out sailing? The final thing we're going to talk about here is the weather. Sailing is definitely a sport where we are more influenced by the weather than any other sport. So firstly, knowing or having a good idea of what the weather might do is essential if you are thinking of going sailing. The wind, of course, is fundamental to the sport of sailing. So especially if you're less experienced, don't be so desperate to get out on the water that you're going to go out in wind which is way beyond your level. You might find very quickly that what was meant to be a lovely time turns into a bit of a nightmare with perhaps quite a lot to clear up afterwards. Much better off in those situations. Perhaps if you are with your boat, you could do some land drills, practicing on land, or perhaps there'd be the possibility to team up with somebody more experienced, so then you can get out on the water in the stronger winds. I would say if you are a beginner sailor or new to catamaran sailing, about 10 knots is a good upper wind range to start with, especially for your first few times out. And then as you get more experienced, then you should start to push the amount of wind that you're going out in. As well as the wind strength, you should also consider the wind direction. Going out with an offshore wind can be very dangerous. If you have any problems with the boat or yourselves, it can be very difficult to get back in. Along with the wind, we might get waves as well. The biggest hazard that the waves can cause is if you've got waves which are close in to the beach where you're launching, and just sailing out through the waves can become a complete mission on itself before you actually get away from the beach. So if you are going out sailing and there are waves, just really take some time before you go out, before you set off, to study what the waves are doing. Look for a place where the waves perhaps aren't breaking as frequently, perhaps where there might even be a flat spot, or perhaps even consider taking your boat somewhere else to launch where it's flat water before you actually sail out. What we also might have to consider is the tide. What we need to know is what the direction and the speed of the tide is going to be. We can find this out using a tide table. It's always a better idea if you are sailing in tide, if it's possible, to sail into the tide to start with. So then when you're coming back, you've got the tide with you, which means if the wind does drop, you're not going to have a problem to get back to where you started from. The other way you could do it, of course, is you could sail with the tide, planning to turn around at the same time when the tide turns, and that means you'll have the tide helping you all of the time. Be on the lookout for the potential for any electrical storms. If it looks like there's going to be an electrical storm, then don't go out. Now, one of the biggest influences that you could have to your safety if you are going sailing, is there going to be a designated safety or support boat out on the water keeping an eye on you, or at least contactable while you're out sailing? If there is going to be a support boat, then that means you're going to be far safer. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a designated support boat. Maybe you've got a friend who's taking his mates out fishing. You could take your phone with you, have his number stored on your phone, so if something did happen, you could call him up, he could come and help out and save the day. Where are you going out sailing? It's always going to be much, much safer going out sailing on a lake or reservoir or a lagoon or somewhere which isn't exposed to the ocean than going out in open sea. On a lake, you won't have any problems with tide. Even if it gets windy, the water is likely to stay pretty flat. And if it's quite a small lake, even if your mast comes down, you'll be blown onto a shore within a fairly short time. So you're going to be much safer sailing on a lake than you'll be sailing on the open sea. Some other fundamental things that you can do to reduce risks when you go out sailing. The first one, this should be fairly common sense, is always tell someone when you're going to be going sailing and at what time you can be expected to be getting back in. And don't forget, of course, to check back in when you get back in. Who are you going sailing with? Where are you going sailing? Give the person that you're telling as much information as possible. If you're going sailing at a location that you're not familiar with, take some time to talk to some local people before you go sailing, just to get an idea of any unknown hazards, such as there may be rocks under the water, or there might be some unusual currents around the area, or some sort of shipping or traffic going on which might not be completely obvious. Good people to talk to would of course be other sailors, but you could talk to fishermen, you could talk to people operating other commercial boats. They're going to have a really good idea of any hazards in the area. And then when you're preparing to go out and when you come back in, don't be afraid to ask for help on land. If there are a lot of people around, you're kind of like, well, I'm going out single-handed, I've got to put the boat in the water, but then I've got to do something with the launching trolley as well. Of course, anybody helping, do make sure that you're not putting them in harm's way in any way, of course. I hope you found that valuable, and I'm also hoping that that didn't put anybody off going catamaran sailing. Do be sure to check out part 2, where we'll be looking at various equipment that you should either carry on your person or on the boat. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon with some more on Joyrider TV.